Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming outside me today. Today, we're headed to the great state of Indiana. We're going to talk with Aaron Wheeler out there in the western part of Indiana, to be more specific. And we're going to be talking a whole bunch of different things today when it comes with coming with a bow setup. Aaron has recently picked back up bow hunting, which is something that we're seeing more and more on the podcast in general, which is just awesome to see. Talking about transitioning from going from running, more stationary ladder stands to ground hunting to now even going into a saddle. And also, of course, it wouldn't be an archery podcast in 2020 without talking about heavy arrows. So, Aaron, I want to thank you so much for joining the podcast. How are you doing tonight, bud?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, it is my pleasure. Thank you for being part of the Average Jack Archery podcast. It's always fantastic to talk to other people just like myself, bow hunters from around the country who just enjoy getting outside and enjoying the sport of archery. And we'll start off here with the very first thing. You can introduce yourself a little bit, but also tell us your bow setup for your hunting that you're doing right now. What brand of bow you're shooting, the poundage, the draw length, your arrow, and we'll dive into the heavy arrows a little bit after that.
All righty. Yeah. My name's Aaron Wheeler. I am currently shooting just a cheap diamond ready to hunt package that you get for about $300. I got it cheap because I was just getting back into archery and I didn't want to spend a bunch of money at the time. So bought one of those. But I'll tell you what, I've loved it so far. It's been great for me. Um, and I'm shooting 55 pounds right now, which I had a shoulder injury years ago. So, shooting a lighter weight kind of helps out with that. And I feel like I can hold a long time with it and I'm just comfortable with it. So,
I think it's great that you bring that up, that you were getting back into archery, but you purchased a more budget setup. You're shooting a little bit lower poundage. Maybe it was a shoulder injury, or for those people that are just getting into archery, getting back into archery, and they just don't have the muscle strength yet. But you're finding that you're incredibly accurate with that more budget-minded setup, and you're very lethal with the type of arrow that you're building, and particularly for this year, right? So you don't feel like you're losing out on anything by not owning a flagship bow, for example.
nope, I sure don't. Um, I never had, even when I was younger, when I was bow hunting, we never spent a ton of money on our bows. I was shooting like a PSE Nova, in the early
Oh,
2000s.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Shot those bows and and it was always, I always liked it. Um, but yeah, the cheap, ready to hunt deal, came with, sights and a whisker biscuit, so it was just cheap and easy, and I was just getting back into it. And I didn't want to spend, $1,500 on on a Hoyt or something. You know what I mean?
Right. If you don't have to, it's not necessary, particularly with today's equipment. Budget bows and setups are infinitely better than they ever were. And you mentioned the Nova. PSE has made the Nova for, I want to say, almost 20, 25 years. It was a bow in their lineup. They just kept, doing little tweaks here and there. But shooting that diamond, my wife shot a diamond. I even shot it as my backup bow, even though it was in a pretty pink camo. It was a real good setup, and slung arrows just fine. And speaking of the arrows, dive into the brand of arrows that you're shooting, and what you're doing this year with your arrow build compared to what you've done in the past in terms of the weight and the broadhead that you're shooting.
Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll start where I started a couple years ago when I first got back into it.
Sounds good.
Um, obviously, like most people, I'm watching, Midwest Whitetail and a lot of, some of the TV shows and YouTube shows, and everybody's shooting, range broadheads or some sort of expandable broadhead. And everybody was shooting, Easton FMJs. So, I went with the FMJ, and I had a rage broad, two blade rage broadhead, which the first year I killed a doe, and she had come in and she was like, she was maybe 7 yards. I mean, she was close. She was right there,
She was in tight.
and yeah, she was in tight, and I got about 8 inches of penetration, which it just went. And I hit her a little forward, got her right in the shoulder meat. It didn't hit any bone or anything, but just right in the shoulder meat, and just that was enough to slow it down. And it just did get far enough that cut the, right the front of the lungs off, right where the windpipe comes in. And so she was dead in 30 yards. I mean, she was down in seconds. I watched her fall over. And there, of course, there's blood everywhere, but it wasn't a pass through, and there was not a lot of penetration. Like it was to the point that I was like, man, that seems like it should have been a lot more than that, because I didn't know any better. I'd never heard of, guys shooting super heavy arrows at the time, and I'd never heard of FOC, and I'd never heard, I didn't know any of that stuff. I never heard of Ed Ashby, that stuff. I just had no idea. I just, it's just what I was watching on TV. So I shot her, and then that year I didn't have a lot of encounters that year, which I think most of that was just the crop we had. We had corn in, and a lot of times there's deer hanging in that corn, and it's hard to get a lot until that corn comes down. Once the corn gets cut, then the hunting gets a lot better. But normally by the time it's cut, it's almost gun season. So I'm using a rifle and doing that. But so I killed her that first year. That was 2 years ago. And then last year, I actually had my oldest son with me, and we had a button buck come up, which generally I wouldn't have shot, but he's like, Dad, shoot it. And it was like his first time with me. So, I'm like, man, I can remember being his age and sitting with my dad and watching my dad shoot deer, and like, yeah, I'd have kicked my dad's butt if he didn't shoot that thing.
Right.
So yeah. So we shoot this button buck. He was about 20 yards, and I shot at him, but similar results. Not a lot of penetration. It was enough to get him. He went down, and it was kind of a long track job. I hit him one lung good, and it just got into the other lung. Nothing, but he went further than what I thought he was going to go, because it was a pretty good shot. But we found him, no big deal. And so I was like, man, it didn't sit right with me, but I thought, well, maybe I'm just too tight to the shoulder, or maybe maybe it's just because I'm shooting 55 pounds and I'm just not shooting enough weight. And I actually had some people, guys that had worked on bows and stuff, and I'd ask them, oh yeah, it's probably just your weight. You're not shooting enough weight, And I was like, okay, I guess I can live with that. It's my shoulder. It is what it is, I'm not going to be shooting 90 pounds,
Right, right.
Some of these, man, I can't do that. So I don't know why. I can't imagine shooting that much weight. But when I was a kid, I used to shoot 70, but that was as much as I ever shot. But so anyway, back to our story. We went into, of course I didn't, I actually shot at a couple deer. I had a real nice encounter with a 10-point buck, and I was hunting off the ground, and he came in, and he came in 210 yards from me, which is on the ground. That's close. I mean,
Yeah. That's
close,
real tight. Man.
It's real close. I was sitting in we had some real small sassafras trees, some saplings. And so I was kind of sitting in them, and because that woods that I hunt's got a lot of sassafras in it. And so I was sitting in these, down in those, and I couldn't shoot when he got to 10 yards. I couldn't shoot him there, just because of there's too much stuff in the way. But he came down and around, and he gave me a 15-yard shot, just perfect, wide open, broadside. And I shoot, and sure as crap, there's this little bitty piece of briar. And I hit that briar. I couldn't see it through my peep. I'm looking at my sights, but your arrow's, 4 inches below that or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So I hit the briar, then my arrow hits the dirt, and he takes off looking around like, what the crap was that? And I'm like, come on, it's hard to get a buck that close on the ground, but it is what it is. And so anyway, that was kind of my story for the year last year. I had another buck that came in later on, kind of similar. He didn't get as close though. He just never did come into range. But I watched him. It was funny. He came in, and I was hunting about 30 yards off the field edge inside the woods, and he came in and bedded down at about 40 yards from me. So, he's 70, 80 yards inside the woods, and he just bedded down and waited till it got dark before he's going to go out in that field. So he just bedded down. He just bedded at 40 yards, and where he was at, I wasn't shooting that far. So I was like, well, crap. But anyway, that was my 2019 bow season. And so then over the winter, and I've watched a lot of YouTube, watched a lot of stuff. I like the hunting public guys, so I was watching them, and they're just, I was just watching shows. And during the whole COVID thing, everything shut down, so I'm sitting at home not doing anything. And all of a sudden they're talking to this guy, and he's yelling about flappers and Twizzlers. And I'm like, what is this guy talking about, And then I start listening, and what he's saying is making a lot of sense. I'm like, well, yeah, that sounds like what I've been experiencing. So then I went on a whole deep dive of about 3 days of binge watching Troy Fowler's YouTube. And yeah, the range fairy bug bit me, and watched all that. And from what I can tell on social media, I'm far from the only person that that went down that rabbit hole. And so I've gotten into a much heavier setup this year. I ended up ordering the that Ethics Ranch Fairy test pack. Got some arrows from Serious Archery. Went with their Apollos, and ended up just shooting some. And it seemed like with my bow, for whatever reason, I started out just shooting at my block. I wasn't paper tuning or anything at first. I just wanted to see how it shot with the weight. And it seemed like the more weight I put on the front of it, the harder that dude hit and the straighter it flew. And it just, I was like, wow, okay. So I was expecting, maybe we'll bump up to, 550 grains or something, somewhere in that. That's kind of where I thought I was going to end up. Well, by the end of it, I'm throwing 300 grain field points on the end of my arrows, and they're the best ones I had. I'm like, what? No, there's no way. I was like, this is crazy. And I had the 100 grain Ethics insert in there. So there's a lot of weight on the front of that arrow, but it flew so good. So I'm like, all right, well, let's try it, see what we end up with. And funny enough, I thought with that much weight, just by listening to other people talk about it, I thought I'd be a 250 spine arrow. I thought with that much weight, that's where I'm going to be. But for whatever reason, my bow shot the 300 spine way better than it did the 250 spine. And I assume it has something to do with the weight. I'm a 30-inch draw, so, I'm not sure why. I really thought I'd be at 250. I thought I'd be at 250 spine, but for whatever reason, it was shooting bullet holes with the 300 spine and all that weight on the front. And I ended up, I think, with fletched. By the time it's fletched and with with lighted nocks, I'm just right around the 750 grain mark. And I used the gold tip calculator, and I think I was somewhere like 23% FOC or something, right in that general vicinity. So a lot of weight, which I know is way overkill for whitetails, but I've never heard anybody overkilling a deer. So I guess if it's dead, right?
Yeah. So are you gonna run then the Sirius Apollos then as the main shaft? Like did you purchase more in addition to the test kit?
I haven't purchased them yet, but I'm getting ready to. I just haven't ordered them yet. They actually were on back order for a long time. So I was kind of waiting. I think Troy sold him a bunch of arrows.
Yeah, he might have sold a pack or two in his time. Yeah. And I'll go back to your original setup here. For those folks that don't know, a Full Metal Jacket, it's a carbon arrow covered with an aluminum sleeve, and they're not light. I don't know if you know the spine that you were shooting off the top of your head, 400, 340, 300.
I think it was 340.
Yeah, so a 340 FMJ, I actually pulled it up here because that's the kind of weird person that I am. 340 is 11.3,
yes,
right? Grains, right? It's heavy, and if you did 11.3 out of a 30-inch arrow, and then you threw on a 100 grain point and a 10 grain knock and 18 grains for blazers, and then maybe I'm just doing math here in my internet browser, like a 15 grain hit insert, you're still talking like 482 grains at least. Right. So it's not like what you were shooting was light. A lot
Right.
of
Yeah.
people that are
Yeah.
shooting.
Comparatively, yeah.
Right, comparatively, you and I, and I've said this a lot over the years, you guys like you and me with a 30, I have a 31-inch draw, like, we can cheat,
Hmm.
shooting a 300, 340, in particular, something like an FMJ or the old school aluminums, we get a lot
Right.
of weight in an arrow. The FOC suffers, but that's okay because, we have a pretty good amount of weight flying down range. But what you were shooting, again, to reiterate, it was not light. And it doesn't surprise me either that your current setup, even with, you have what, 400 you said up front?
Yeah, it'd be right at, yeah.
Uh,
Well, actually, with the broadheads I went with, which I guess I didn't get to that. I ended up doing the tough heads. I got the
okay.
315 grain screw in tough heads, so I'm actually at 415 up front.
Okay. Well, at either way, for the folks at home, it would also kind of sound like 30-inch draw. 55 pounds isn't like a light poundage. Um, But, shooting a 300 spine arrow at 55 pounds, that diamond bow and a lot of bows that are more these budget friendly options, which I think is really good that they're made this way. They're slower in their IBO speed. They're not as aggressive. The kinetic energy that they're producing into the arrow right there, and the radicalness of it, it's not going to hurt you downrange, but it offers a smoother draw cycle and it offers less force on the arrow. So you'll often find with these more budget friendly options that you don't need to go to 250 to 200 spine. Even if you're a guy like me or Aaron with a long draw length, you can still get away with a 300 spine, even with, 3 to 400 grains up front, which is clearly what you're experiencing.
Right.
Um, and that's always a positive because it's kind of a bugger to buy 200 spine arrows. Trust me, I know. Uh, they're not easy to find, and they're definitely not cheap, and not all manufacturers make them. And so 300 spine in particular, every manufacturer makes a 300 spine arrow from gold tip to victory to Sirius and Easton and everything else in between. So that's really cool. And then of course that tough head's that's a single bevel,
Right.
and that sucker's. I mean that's a big stinking broadhead. That is a grown up broadhead there.
Yeah,
Uh,
I got them in the mail, and I was like, oh my god, what am I doing?
yeah, the package weighs, pretty, like one broadhead weighs as much as like a cheaper broadhead whole entire package. Like it's
Right.
a
Yeah.
pretty impressive thing. Um,
Yeah.
so I'll say this: so you've been able to practice with these test arrows from this test kit and everything,
Yeah.
and at, your typical bow hunting distances, the farthest I've ever shot at a deer and harvested a deer is 35 yards. And from us talking prior to recording the podcast, and as we've gone through here, it sounds like you're basically sticking to about 30 yards and under.
Yeah.
And with that distance set in mind, even for me as a longtime veteran of archery hunting, that 35 yards was a perfect 35-yard scenario. It was wet, it was windy, the woods were loud. The deer had no idea it was there. There were a lot of things that went into that 35-yard shot because a lot of things can happen. And so, my question to you is, when it comes to shooting those longer distances, are you worried about shooting that 25 to 30-yard shot because now you've almost doubled your arrow weight, right? You're shooting
Right.
like an arrow and a half
Yeah. I'm
down
shooting a
now at this.
log.
Right, you're shooting a piece of rebar with a broadhead on the front. So, are you concerned at all about that 25 to 30, or is it just something just like prior with your earlier setup that no, it's just you still have to wait for the right moment?
Honestly, I'm not worried about it. For one, I generally don't have many shots that far anyway. Most of the setups I've had so far, especially when I was hunting off the ground, in that woods that I hunt, it gets pretty thick. So generally, my shots are, even when I'm gun hunting, my shots are 20 yards. You know what I mean? I just don't have a lot of long shots unless I'm sitting on the edge of the field, and, just planning on shooting way out in the field if I want, which I can. But bow hunting, I'm in the woods and I'm trying to get close. I've got a trail that, I know they've been using a lot, and they use it pretty heavy because they got a lot of trails over there that they use real heavy. So I get in between bedding areas and stuff, especially during the rut, and I can generally catch deer moving between the bedding areas, and I can set up 15, 20 yards off one of those, and that's about where my shot's going to be.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's good that you already have that mindset. I think it's very important for anybody at home who is getting into the sport of bow hunting, or even if you're already in it, you're just a few years in it. You have to remember that this scenario that we're putting ourselves in is not sitting with a gun on the edge of a field where that bullet almost gets there the moment you touch the trigger.
Right.
This arrow, whether it's 350 grains or it's 750 grains, it's going to take some time to get to the animal, and you can't beat the speed of sound. And so I
No.
think it's really important. I'm glad that you're already recognizing there, and that distance that you need to keep short, and also it makes it way more fun
Oh yeah.
to have that animal in that close. It's just a real intimate moment there in the woods, which is really cool. And speaking of getting animals in close, I want to transition to the idea of becoming more mobile. We talked before the podcast about how this works, and we also talked about Indiana private land versus public land. I'll let you explain that for your county here in a little bit, because I'm used to public land, all traveling into the woods. Half mile, mile and a half, even more in certain cases, in particular in like turkey season, where we have all this million and a half acres of public land. Indiana, that's not the case, but you have a little bit different in your particular county. But you, over the past few years, you've now acquired this access to a piece of land. I'll let you elaborate on in a moment. But you've also started to, even though you're hunting private land, where you can have set stands and you don't have all the restrictions of how long those tree stands can set out. And we can't cut shooting lanes on public land in PA. And I don't know if you can in Indiana, but you can cut shooting lanes and you can move brush piles around to funnel deer move and all that sort of stuff. Yet you want to become more mobile. So, which I think is really cool, because I'm hearing that more and more from people, even though they hunt private land and they might be the only ones on it, or it's thousands of acres that they share with just a few people. They still want to become more and more mobile because they're tired of looking at the same stand, and they think the deer are patterning them more than they're patterning the deer. So I want you to unpack your particular region in Indiana first, and that little parcel, well, I shouldn't say little, 500-acre parcel that you have access to there in Indiana, but also the public access that you have as well.
Right. Well, I'm in West Central Indiana. Actually, Park County is what we're in, and it's not right on the Illinois border, but we're a county over from the Illinois border. We're about 50 miles straight west of Indianapolis. It's a pretty good county. Pretty big deer come out of here, and we've got, like you said, Indiana doesn't have a ton of public land, but our county just happens to have some public land in it. There's actually a piece of about 1,200 acres in the northern part of the county. It's about 15 minutes from my house. And then there's also a smaller piece that's connected to a big state recreation area. And they have like 250 acres ish set off just for hunting. So that's like 5 minutes from my house. I'm real close to that. So I've got some public land options if I want to. Now, I've never really checked it out during hunting season. Of course, everybody says, "Well, it's public land, so it's getting hunted hard." I don't know that to be a fact. It may be just covered up. I don't know. I haven't been out there, but I've been out there recently just kind of check things out. Just out of curiosity. I actually went when the morels were popping. I went and hit that big 1,200-acre piece up, just kind of walk it and plus find some morels, and I found some. But I did find some tree stands still in the woods. So I mean, there's definitely guys in there. I don't know how heavy it gets hit, but I'm sure during the gun season it gets hit real hard. But I've been betting during the early archery, it's not, it doesn't get hit too hard. But yeah. But then I've got, for me, I kind of lucked into a place. I had a friend of my wife's, which I actually, I had grown up with her. We went to church together. I've known her since I was like 5 years old. Knew her family. Her and my wife were real good friends. And so we were talking to them one night, and they didn't have anybody hunting their property, and I was like, and they just didn't let people, and I just happened to ask, hey, mind if I go hunting? And they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so I've got this big piece of land that I can hunt that nobody else is allowed to hunt, which is awesome. But there are some downfalls to it, because when I say I'm the only one that can hunt it, I mean I'm the only one that can hunt it. That means I can't bring my brother, and I can't bring my dad, and I can't bring friends. It means I can hunt it, and that's it. So I'm not going to complain because
Yeah.
I mean
I don't think
I'm not
anybody
going
would
to complain.
complain for like 500 prime real estate acres
Yeah,
in
yeah,
in Western
exactly. And I
Indiana.
yeah, and I don't have to pay for it. It's free, so I'm not complaining at all. It's great hunting. There's good bucks on it. I had some great pictures this past year. I had like 4 bucks on that I would have shot. I had that close encounter last year with that 10 pointer. It was a really nice deer. He was probably 130-inch deer. Which isn't a giant, but he would have been my biggest. He
Well, I
was a
mean,
good
come to
deer.
PA and you see 130 in PA, you better shoot that thing.
Yeah.
That sucker's a Boone and Crockett here in
Yeah,
PA.
right. There was an 8 pound. The one I really wanted last year, and I never did see him was there's a really nice wide racked 8 pointer, and it was cool because I had pictures of him the year before, and he didn't have a very big rack at all. But the only reason I knew it was the same buck is he had the double white patch on his neck.
Mm.
And so this past year, I got his picture of this really super wide 8 pointer. I'm like, where did this deer come from? And then, like, the next picture, his head was up and he had that double patch. I'm like, no way. And so then I got to looking, and the characteristics of the rack are actually really close because the tips kind of curl up. And I was like, holy crap, that is that same deer. He just blew up in a year. He went from a small 2.5-year-old deer to a giant 3.5-year-old deer. So, and he's 135 inches probably. He's a little bigger than a 10 pointer just because he had so much width, and he had a pretty tall rack too. He was a nice deer. I'd love to get a shot at him, but I never did see him on the hoof. But yeah, that piece that I've got, the one big downfall to it is a lot of the acreage. It's about 500 acres. It's not exactly that, but there's a lot of it's just this big ag field. And so if you picture a big block, it's basically a square, a rectangular block, and the road that I would access it from is on the west side of it. And it's a rectangle. The long way would be north and south, and then it's shorter east to west. But there's this giant ag field on the west side of it, and then there's other people around that own around the edges, and so there's no access I can't get access from the backside because that guy, he hunts back there, and there's really no way of accessing it other than through this big ag field, which really sucks when the crops are out. It's great if the corn's up because I can slip through the corn and the deer's not going to see me. But once the corn's out, it's, I'm in trouble. They can see me coming from a mile away. So that gets a little tough. But what I was finding was that you were talking just a little bit ago about deer patterning you. I had put a ladder stand in the first year I hunted, and I killed about 125-inch 8-pointer, like my second day hunting. And I had actually seen a buck about the same size the day before, and that was the first year I hunted it. And I only gun hunted; I didn't bow hunt at the time. And that was during gun season. And that deer I saw, great. And then they had no idea what was there. I was like, wow, this is going to be great. This place is awesome. I'm seeing bucks every day. And so then the second year it was almost as good, not quite as good, but I was still seeing a lot of deer. Well, then by the third year, I just was not seeing deer, but I was still hunting that same stand in the same location, and I hadn't put 2 and 2 together yet, but I'm like, why am I not seeing deer? I couldn't figure it out. And then it just continuously got worse. And I started hunting there. It's been about 8 years now. This is probably my 8th season hunting out there. And like I said, just progressively, I was seeing less and less bucks. I've seen a ton of does. Honestly, I can count on one hand the amount of sits that I've had where I didn't at least see probably 5 does. There's a lot of does out there, a lot of deer, and so I mean, there's always action. There's always something going on. But the bucks, I just wasn't seeing the mature bucks. I'd see a lot smaller bucks, but just nothing nice, nothing I'd want to shoot at. And so finally, I was just, doing what I normally do, watching YouTube videos and stuff. And I think it was the Hunting Public guys. I was watching some of their videos, and they were doing like a public land challenge, and they were Dan Infault was on there, and he got there. I think they did a podcast with him too, and they're talking about being mobile and doing this and that, and then so then I started watching some more of the hunting beast videos and stuff, and I was like, man, the stuff he's talking about, I think he's right. I think these deer are they're on to me. You know what I mean? I've been sitting in the same stand year after year, and they know I'm there. And it was a nice spot. It's like an inside corner where the field kind of comes in, and it's got woods on two sides, and it was kind of a pinch point. A lot of deer were using it, but just as the years went on, it was less and less of the bucks were using it. Or I would get trail cam pictures of them, but it was always at night. It was always nighttime. They just weren't using it during the day. And so I was like, man, I got to get more mobile. So last year, and we talked before the podcast, I'm a bigger guy. So for me, being mobile is a little more difficult because, I'm not a 200-pound guy that can just throw a stand up in throw any stand on and go climb a tree. No big deal. It's got to be big enough to handle me. So I'm so I was, my best option was just hunt off the ground. So I did a little bit last year, and I had two really good encounters with bucks that I would have shot. Both of them in the that one was that 10-pointer was, like I said, he was 125, 130 inch 10-pointer, nice deer. And he, I got down, and it was funny. I only moved on him where I shot at him. I missed him. But where I shot at him I was only about 75 yards from my ladder stand. But I had just moved further down in the woods. And what I figured out is they were just moving down around where I couldn't see. There's a little creek that runs down through there, and there's a little drop off. And once I got down in there and looked at it, I'm like, oh, they're just going around me. I'm
Right.
just not seeing them because they're just sliding right around me.
Right.
And so I set up on.
This is a very important piece that's incredible that people just overlook yearly, just overlook yearly. And that is, I remember growing up, when I was a kid, I didn't hunt much public land. I hunted with my granddad. Of course, he would take me out to the family farm, which we don't have access or own anymore. I stopped hunting that, gosh, when I was 16. So, we're talking 13 years ago now. But every year we would sit in the exact same tree, but for firearm season, and it overlooked a ditch, it overlooked a gully, and above us was a hunting camp, and below us was another kind of farm, and the deer would just get blasted at one end and the other, and they would just run this gully. We would see the same deer every single time. They get blasted at in the south, they come running past us, go up to the north, they get blasted at in the north, and an hour later they come running down, and we'd have a herd of does that started out at 10 that would end at 4. That type of thing. But that type of scenario was guaranteed every single year because of the topography, because of the pressure, that we would see deer there. It never failed, never once. Now, every now and then we'd see a big buck, but most of the time, the big buck that we would end up catching we would have another person at one other location that was not that main travel corridor, not that main gully. And it was a part we called the Oak Flat, which I think everybody has a thing called the Oak Flat. And it actually had a giant boulder on it, and someone would sit on that boulder overlooking this Oak Flat, and this deer would, like, you could watch them. The does would come down from the north, and the buck would split off, and he would come down and sneak along a laurel bed along this Oak Flat, and might be the only deer that you would see all day, but that would be the biggest buck that we would get that day. And the same thing applies, and more importantly, to the archery season. As soon as they figure out what the main travel route is, and that you're the one that's constantly disrupting it, they're going to change, because they are a prey species. They're not going to keep. That's just stupid of them. If their whole point is to stay alive, and if they continue to do the same thing that gets them in trouble every single Saturday morning, they're going to change what they're doing. And that is something that's very important and a critical thing to pick up in your first 5 years of bow hunting. I know I really struggled with it because it was gun season and you always see the same thing. And then I go sit there in archery season and never see a darn thing. Well, it's because just because you saw them there doesn't mean they're going to go there when they're not pressured and they have all the cards. So that's a very important piece to bring up. And it's cool that you're bringing in the mobile part. And all you have to do, people think that mobility is a mile deep, half mile deep. You got to take a kayak. You got to have an e-bike. You move 75 yards, right? And that 75 yards made a world of difference. And in particular, in your situation where you are in so much ag, which is true of Iowa and Illinois and Kansas in certain spots, you don't have a whole lot of woodlot to, have good bedding. If the corn's up, obviously they're going to bed in the corn, or if the beans are tall enough. But here in PA, we just have woods everywhere. And it seems like, oh, I got to get in deep. Well, for you, getting in deep might mean just moving 50 yards to the west to change a little thermal, or 75 to the north to do this, that, and the other thing. And that's really important to know. It doesn't have to be 4 miles in. It could be just
Right.
a simple change.
Yeah, and like for me, my thing was, looking back now, I feel like an idiot. I've got, like we talked about before the podcast, the property I hunt, most of it's that big ag field. But I mean, there's still, there's at least 150 acres of wooded that I can hunt. But I was hunting the same stand every year. Now it was because I was seeing deer every time I sat in it. But at the same time, there's all in it. There's stuff I still haven't really hunted yet, and I'm going to try to hunt a lot more of it this year. Which I've got another tool in my arsenal that we talked about a little bit before the podcast, and I'm working on be able to use that. And that's the tree saddle. And like I said, I'm a big guy, and so I kind of made a goal for myself. I'm going to lose a bunch of weight so I can get up and use this tree saddle, because hunting on the ground in archery is a bear. I mean, it's just tough. Getting deer close on the ground. I mean, it's doable. I did it. I had that deer. He came into 10 yards. I couldn't shoot him at 10 yards, but he came to 10 yards. But sitting on the ground, and what happened? Well, I missed him because I hit a piece of brush. So that that's part of sitting on the ground. So getting in a tree was important for me. And I just, I was watching guys starting to use these saddles, and I thought, that's something I want to do. But obviously at my weight, I was 375-ish. That's going to be hard for a guy my size. So I went ahead and said, you know what, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to lose some weight. And so in the past about month or so, I've lost 25 pounds, getting after it, trying to, actively trying to lose some weight, which I needed to do anyway. Whether it was hunting related or not, I mean, I needed to lose some weight.
Any excuse to do more hunting because you lost weight is just that's a winner
exactly.
chicken dinner in my book.
Exactly. So this year I'm hoping to be a lot more mobile. My plan is this year to never sit in the ladder stand once. I want to take the saddle with me every sit in a different tree every time I go. And even if that tree's 20 yards from the tree that I sat in last night, so what? It's still different.
Right.
Because that may be all you need. When you're 20 yards when you're bow hunting, that's maybe the difference between killing a deer and not being able to get a shot off.
Right.
So,
and can make and not getting the shot off. And for something like for someone like me, where I shot that, like I alluded to earlier, I took a shot at a deer at 35 yards, but taking 20 yards off of that, I would have just felt so much better. I was able to make a clean shot. Not all the situations don't have to be perfect, right? All the conditions don't have to be perfect, because the further that shot has to happen, or the less optimal the setup has to be, the more things have to go right for that shot to occur. And in particularly, for guys like you and me, we might think we might have a difficult time hiding ourselves in a tree situation. And I talked earlier, before we went on air here, that I only get about 15 feet off the ground to my actual
Right.
feet in a saddle. And this is something that's very important. Everybody talks about how high do you get a tree stand? How high do you get a tree stand? I like 20, 25 feet. I like 12. 12 is a real good number for me.
Right.
I'm not afraid of heights at all, and I feel very safe in a saddle. But 12 to 15 foot for my predator platform, my tethered predator platform, because people forget that when you're in a saddle and you're standing, you're adding 3, 4, in my case, almost 5 feet from where my actual bow arm is to where my feet are. So I'm adding that extra 19, or I'm up to 19 feet if I'm at a 15-foot platform, or almost 20. So, now I'm up at this higher angle, and the further that deer gets away, and if you're shooting a heavier arrow out of a slower bow, like you and I are, we have a lot more lob to our arrow. That means there's more arc as it's going 30 to 40 yards. Lots of things have to be the ducks have to be in so many more rows at that further distance. And it's funny that you mentioned the ladder stand and you move 20 yards away from it. It reminds me many years ago, I used to work as a maintenance crew worker at a local Christian camp here in Central PA, and it was quite expansive. They had a lot of like these rope courses and all these things around the camp in the woods. And one of them had a ladder stand right next to one of these rope courses, and it was a traditional doe hunting spot. And one time I was out there after camp was over. It was the early fall, and we done some fishing in the morning, and I needed to shoot a doe. And so I went up to that spot there, and I had an old steel climber tree stand. And I got there, and I was like, the trail for this, there was an obvious faint trail about 20 yards away from that ladder stand. And then about 20 to 30 yards down the hill was a much more pronounced trail. And I don't know. And so I ended up setting up within 15 yards of that more pronounced trail, had a doe come in, and I ended up shooting her. And I never saw anything on that less pronounced trail that was close to that ladder stand. Now, could that have been just because that's the trail she picked? Do they actually use that less pronounced trail closer to the ladder stand? Or was that less pronounced trail like that because they had patterned that ladder stand? I'll never know, but it's something I always think about in the back of my mind that, I have lots of spots where I continuously kill deer every year. I don't know how long that's going to last. I'll bet you that I have one spot where I shot my buck opening day last year that we got on camera. I'll guarantee you probably this year is the last year for that spot before I have to let it go cold for quite some time.
Right.
Because that's probably it'll be three consecutive years of shooting bucks out of that stand. It's like the first week. And I think
Gotcha.
eventually they'll learn.
Right.
Because
They'll
PA
get on
deer are
to
not stupid. So anyhow, yeah, that's cool. I love hearing people coming to the realization that being mobile, and it's just so much more fun. It
Yeah.
really is. It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, here I go plodding to my stand. There's so much more gamemanship
Right.
and the pursuit and the planning and the prep. It's all so much more climactic than when it actually is successful.
Well, and I like just the thought of being able to go. Let's say I go in the morning. Maybe I don't have the exact tree picked out before I go, but I know where I want to be. So I go in there, slide in the morning, get up in the tree. I get down. Well, say an hour rolls around, we get half hour past daylight. Shooting light. Plenty of shooting light, and I'm seeing deer at 60 yards, and they keep moving on that trail. And I've had this happen. It happens all. I've had that happen several times in that ladder stand. I'd see deer at 60 yards. And it's like, okay, wish I was closer to that. Well, now with the saddle, I don't see anything around, I might just slide down the tree and move.
Right.
You know, I may move a little tighter in there, or and I just like having that option. I like not feeling like I'm tied to a spot. And really, a lot of it was just laziness. I threw the ladder stand up. It was there. It was easy. Yeah, we'll hunt here. It's easy. Why do anything different? Why move it? Those things are bare to move around. I've actually got two of them out there, but the one I hunted a lot out of just because I always see deer. I don't know that I've ever sat in that particular stand and didn't see deer. I
Right.
mean, you always see something. But like I said, I wasn't seeing the mature bucks, and normally for a long time that didn't bother me because I just like shooting deer, putting meat in the freezer. I'm not, I didn't kill an antlered buck last year, and that didn't bother me in the least. You know what I mean? That was just how my season went, and I could have hunted a lot more than I did, but I hunted a lot during bow season. So I really wanted to get a buck during bow season, and I came close a couple times. But I was excited that even though I missed that buck, because I hit that brush, I was excited that it worked. And at first I was so frustrated. I was like, "Are you kidding me? I did all this. I came that close, and I didn't get him. Like, really?" But then, like, the more I thought about it, I was like, "Well, really though, it worked. The plan worked. It did. It went exactly. It couldn't have went any better. I had a very nice 10-pointer at 10 yards. Me sitting on the ground. I mean, he was right there. Everything worked out exactly how I wanted it to. It just just messed the shot up. That's going to happen. So I just had to look at it as a positive, and think, okay, this works. Now I know it works. Now let's do it. Now let's do it more. And yeah, I'm excited about this season. This season's going to be so fun because I got so much new stuff going. And anytime you got new stuff going, that you're always excited to try your new stuff, new
Oh
toys.
yeah.
New toys.
Try the new toys, and when the new toys make life so much more fun, it's
Right?
just in your brain you're like, "Oh yeah, that was so worth spending that money to make
Oh,
that
yeah.
new it just works." And I'll go back to it really is 99% of the fun for me because yeah, I shot my buck opening day and I probably had another, we have antler restrictions in Pennsylvania, so I have to, in order to shoot a deer, it has to have 3 points on one side of its head in my part of the state. And so I don't really count the bucks that I see that aren't legal. But even after I shot my buck opening day and I only had a doe tag left, um, the number of times where I got set up in scenarios and I saw legal bucks, it just gets me all fired up knowing that, like, all right, I put myself in this spot. I wasn't successful, but I saw a buck or I saw a doe. Maybe it was a young doe, a fawn that I didn't want to shoot, but I put myself in this situation. It wasn't by random. I deliberately looked at the map online. For me, it's on X, or maybe I went and scouted this area, boots on the ground, and I picked this tree and I thought, in middle of November, this is where the deer are going to be. And then I sat in this tree and gosh darn it, they showed up. Right. And it's this sense of accomplishment that you weren't like, oh yeah, I went out to Old Faithful and well, it's called Old Faithful for a reason because there's always
Yeah.
deer there. And I
Right.
hate it. I hate the phrase, but I love it. For turkey season, my buddy and I always say, never leave turkeys to find turkeys. And it's really hard with deer. Never leave deer to find deer. I mean, if you could, a doe tastes the same as a buck. Venison is venison. And it's really hard to leave that comfort zone knowing that potentially you could fail. But just like you said, you went out and you failed. You didn't get the shot, the shot to hit, the buck, but you got the shot off at 10 yards. What a success. And the actual harvest is just the icing on the cake. And so I think that's a very important thing for everybody that's starting out in the bow hunting, and then of course launching into the mobile hunting as well, that everybody's starting to do. Gets you active. In your case, you're losing weight, which is fantastic. You're enjoying the sport more than you ever thought you would. You're really
Yep.
exploring. Like you said, you've barely scratched the surface in some of the spots, even though it's only 150 acres.
Right.
And that's just really cool to hear that from you, because that, I think, that transfers to every bow hunter across this country.
Right. Yeah. It's exciting. I'm super stoked for this season. I'm just it's fun. Just the whole process I went through. I've never done this before. Normally, when I just a couple years ago when I first started bow hunting again, it was I went to the store, I bought a box of FMJs, I threw I got 100 grain field points and some 100 grain rages. I shot my field points. Seemed got I was shooting decent groups. Everything looked okay, no big deal. Threw the broadheads on. I shot one of my broadheads a couple times just to make sure it was, make sure I didn't have to mess with anything. Everything looked fine, cool. And I went. That was it. Well, this year, I've gone through, bear shaft tuning, which I didn't even know that was a thing until this year. I never heard of it.
Yeah.
I had no idea. you know, I'm like, when I seen the first time I seen somebody bear shaft, I'm like, why would you shoot with no fletchings? Like, what are you doing? I'm thinking this thing's gonna just tumble end over end,
Mm-hmm.
down. So to be honest, the first time I shot one bear shaft, I was like, this is sketchy. I don't know about
Right.
this. But it's fine, and it was fun. It was fun going through the process, knock tuning and I'm sure like the more you do it, it probably gets to where you're like, oh, I got a knock tune. But for
It
me this year,
does. As someone who's been doing it for the better part of a decade, it's a
yeah,
royal pain in the butt.
I could see it being that way. But for me, because it was the first time, I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is fun. You know, but it was, yeah, I mean, it was a blast. And just seeing the paper tears, like, I'll tell you what, it was, it was funny because, like I said, I thought 250 spine was where I'd want to be. And when I was so I started paper tune, shooting through paper, and I just rigged up a crude deal outside of my house here. I had made me a little A-frame type thing, hung some paper, and was just shooting my target through that, and I'll tell you what, some of the 250 spines I shot, I think I could have had better holes throwing a tomahawk through the paper. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It was some bad tears, man. I was like, oh my God, that's not right. But the first time I shot, I was like, well, I'll try the 350 spine, see what happens. And I shot that 350 spine, and it was like, that was almost perfect bullet hole. The first time I shot, I was like, oh, that looks way better. And so I ended up moving my rest just a hair, and that's all I had to do, and it was money. And then I backed up, I'm shooting, back down all the way to 10 yards shooting through paper, and it was money. I mean, just beautiful. I was like, wow, that was way easier than I thought it was going to be, but hey, I'll take it. I ain't gonna complain. Because of course, I was reading guys' stuff online, and they're talking about trying to bear shaft tune through paper, and they're just, they'd get it right close, but then they'd back up, and it'd be like, tumbling through there. And oh man, this might be tough. I don't know. And I was actually worried whether I'd be able to do it myself because I've never done any of this type of stuff
Right.
before. This was all a new experience for me, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to figure it out. If I was having issues, if I'm shooting knock low, why would it be doing that? What would, and so I'm watching videos, and a lot of your videos were very helpful,
Well,
and
that's
I just
good.
I stumbled onto your videos. It was like I was watching a bunch of Troy's videos, and then there's always suggestions, and yours came up, and I was like, oh, cool, another guy shooting bear shaft too. Let's check this out. And that's how I stumbled onto your channel, and yours. I like. Let's see. Let me put it this way. Troy's, a lot of his videos were, especially the earlier ones, were very good to get me started. But then, like, he wouldn't go into too much detail.
He
Yours were
paints with a
very
very
much
broad brush, and he'll tell you
right.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yours were very they were a lot more detailed, and I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. It was kind of like watching both of them. His kind of eased me into it, and you kind of just nailed it down to a fine point. I'm like, now I got it.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Troy and I are fantastic friends.
Yeah.
We talk all the time. The guy, it's not an act what he does.
Oh, he's awesome.
That is who he is. And but yeah, we're approaching the same problem, and he paints
Mhm.
with he is the working man's
Right.
face, right? And
Yeah.
I'm the geek, punching numbers into a computer in a cubicle. When you need the analytics done, when you need to know a specific issue with a specific bow, and he'll tell you, and he's done it in his videos, he doesn't know, and that's not his thing to know. That's my thing to know. I just got done working. I worked at the bow shop tonight, and I was working and looking at 6 different bows with 6 different cam systems from 6 different companies from 6 different years, and I knew how to work on all of them. Right, that's my thing, and so that's cool to hear your perspective too. Like, Troy was your gateway drug, and
Right.
then
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
ended up being your dealer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that that kind of
Yeah.
how that works.
I started with the fairy dust,
Right.
and then
You just end up
you're
being
the
average.
you're the real hard stuff. I
Yeah,
don't.
you end up going off the full analytical 45-minute long deep end. That's how it works.
Exactly. Exactly. It was awesome. No, it was so much fun. It really was fun going through the process and shooting. And it's funny. Another thing that I never even thought about it was sharpening broadheads.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that just never even crossed my mind. I was buying brand new broadheads out of the package. Why would you need to
They're sharp.
sharpen them?
They're sharp in the package.
Yeah,
Why
they
would
should
it?
be
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But then when you think about it, like I could play with those things in my hand, squeeze them, and they weren't cutting nothing.
Yeah.
I'll tell you right now, I bought a strop, and I stropped them. They came sharp. Those tough heads come sharp. They're sharp. But I stropped them, and now they're scary sharp. Like I'm scared to touch them sharp. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah, you got to watch where those things are. You
Yeah, I
really,
mean
you
they're
have to.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have the
they're
same problem with
awesome.
my Magnus stuff. Like when I'm pulling it out of the quiver, it's like I'm playing that game of Operation, when we were kids,
Yeah,
like I pull it out and I'm watching the head the whole time, because if I get close to a bowstring, it just breathes on it. It's
yeah.
done. It's over.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Those things, it's awesome, and I'm just like, I cannot wait to stick these in the deer because it's gonna be unreal.
It's going to fly
I,
right through it.
I'm so excited, man. I'm stoked for it. It's gonna be a lot of fun this fall.
Well, Aaron, I thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It has been an absolute blast. Do you have any social media that anybody should follow, or is it all personal?
It's all pretty much personal. I
That's
don't have
fine,
anything.
man. I
I'm
just like to
just
plug people if they want to be plugged.
yeah.
Just
I mean, if somebody wants to find me on Facebook, they'd probably add me, but
yeah.
I don't know how many friends I got. I think you got like a 5,000 friend limit.
Well,
I got
if
a
you
couple
shoot
thousand.
something with that absolute piece of rebar
Yeah.
this fall, I need a picture
Yes.
that's going to go on social media,
That
because
works for me, man.
all right, that I better happen, because that
Yes.
connection needs to be made. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Average Jack Archery Podcast. Again, if you want to be like Aaron or anybody else that you hear on the podcast, please send me an email at averagejackarchery@gmail.com. Hit me up on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we'll get to see you next time.